We start with the news in our top headline tonight. Leftist media resorts to conspiracy theories to sell Syria invasion. Desperate to sell another humanitarian invasion, the leftist media in the United Kingdom has resorted to inventing conspiracy theories about events in Syria as part of a campaign to depict President Bashar Assad's government as genocidal, while completely failing to acknowledge that the country is in a state of civil war. Now, according to the attacks on Gary Franchi and others, you're a mentally ill thought criminal if you even question the official 9/11 story. But on the other hand, it's perfectly acceptable to talk about false flag terror if you're blaming it on one of the US military-industrial complex's main targets for invasion, which of course we know is Syria. And just as they sold the humanitarian bloodbath in Libya with this liberal humanitarian caring veneer, with terrorists, of course, now ruling that country with an iron fist, Libyans tortured, put in concentration camps, the Al-Qaeda flag flying over courthouses, the liberal media again, in particular the UK Guardian and the Independent, are up to their old tricks selling this latest humanitarian war. Despite the fact that the independent Arab League report makes it clear that Syria is in a state of civil war and the opposition rebels, which the corporate media calls activists, are carrying out rocket-propelled grenade attacks, blowing up buildings, The Guardian has basically become a 24-hour rolling mouthpiece for Syrian, quote, activists with Twitter accounts blaming terrorist bombings which are killing Assad's men on Assad himself. So basically you've got the entire leftist corporate media, both in Britain and internationally, characterizing these Syrian rebels as activists when they're carrying around RPGs and conducting terror attacks that are killing scores of people. Now imagine if the Occupy Wall Street movement started walking around with RPGs and bombing government buildings. Do you think that the US media would call them, quote, activists, or would they call them terrorists? But the international corporate media will not acknowledge the fact that Syria is in a state of civil war and that there's violence on both sides. And why? Well, we know, because the fix is in for another NATO humanitarian bloodbath. The Arab League report clearly says that these opposition rebels are carrying out, quote, indiscriminate violence, and yet The Guardian still refers to them as activists and has completely prostrated itself, as I said, with a 24-hour news scroll, which is the platform for these activist tweets, which could be coming from anywhere. And then on the flip side, we've got The Independent, which came out with a story claiming that Assad's forces are killing babies, newborn babies. And this, of course, is a throwback to the manufactured tale of Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi incubator babies. You remember that one was cooked up by the US PR firm Hill & Knowlton. So we're seeing a similar situation unfold. And it, in fact, turns out that that claim about Assad killing babies comes from within the halls of the British Foreign Office itself. So just because some activist says it on Twitter and then The Independent gives it credence doesn't mean it's gospel. Patrick Henningsen on Infowars proved that it came directly from within the British Foreign Office. So again, the leftist media is manipulating their flock into supporting this war under the guise of humanitarianism, repeating precisely the same trick that we saw in Libya just a year ago. So moving on to our next story, Chinese government demands 250 million internet users provide real identities. The communist Chinese government has demanded some 250 million users of the Twitter-style microblogging platform Weibo provide their real names, addresses, and identity numbers, marking a new era of internet censorship and one that the likes of Joe Lieberman want to see enforced in the United States. And so why do they want the real names and addresses on this Chinese version of Twitter? Well, it's so people will be afraid of criticizing government officials, government atrocities, and live in fear that they'll get that knock on the door. It's a chilling effect. That's why they're doing it. And don't forget, we've featured the clip on many occasions. Joe Lieberman told CNN in 2010, we want that Chinese-style internet here in the United States. We want the kill switch in case of war. And yet, when you look at on what occasions China blocks and censors the internet, it has nothing to do with war. It has nothing to do with genuine security concerns. They habitually do it to silence dissent about government corruption or to shut people up about atrocities that the Communist Party has committed, like the recent murders in Tibet, for example. So this is what they want in America. This is what Lieberman has called for, and this is why we need to fight internet censorship in all its guises, as happened recently with the defeat of SOPA. Three headlines now that coalesce into the same issue. LAPD pioneers high-tech crime-fighting war room, reports CBS Los Angeles. We've also got out of BBC News, spying on Europe's farms with satellites and drones. And a third headline in this series, out of the Daily Mail, meet the North Dakota family of anti-government separatists busted by cops using a Predator drone after stealing 6 cows. And what do all these news stories have in common? Well, governments across the West have declared war on their own people, whether that be targeting the American people as the primary focus on the war on terror, as we've documented, or in Europe, where farmers are being targeted for what they choose to do with their own land. The common theme is, of course, the use of surveillance drone technology. Once the domain of overseas occupations in hunting down insurgents, now farming families who have cows walk onto their property. They're the new insurgents in modern America. Farmers in Europe who don't abide by every dictatorial mandate of the unelected totalitarian European Union, they're also the new insurgents under this surveillance drone system. Of course, we also had the report 30,000 drones will be in American skies spying on US citizens within 10 years, according to the FAA. And what will they be used for? Well, if Homeland Security in their history of using these drones is anything to go by, they'll be used to repress the American people. Remember the story we covered at the end of last year? Homeland Security aided the Jamaican government in the massacre of scores of innocent people after a botched drug raid. It was a DHS drone that provided the surveillance for Jamaican authorities to go door to door, indiscriminately killing people. And of course, now we've had the announcement that DHS is planning to spend $50 million on LiDAR technology to be used in both, quote, emergency and non-emergency situations for homeland defense purposes. And what is LiDAR normally used for in this context? Hunting down insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq. American people, you are the new insurgents, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Next story, no female TSA agents means no flight for Denver woman. This is out of Fox 31 Denver. Quote, they wouldn't let me get on the plane because I'm female, Winning said. And this is, of course, the lady who was prevented from taking her flight. She said she checked in and arrived at security about 35 minutes before the scheduled departure of her United flight. Quote, they asked if I was on the flight to Denver. I said yes. They said that they couldn't screen me because they've sent all the female TSA agents home, Winning said. A female agent was necessary because of those new pat-downs. That's right, those new pat-downs where they go directly in the pants and touch your genitalia. That's why they needed somebody, a female screener in the building, but they'd sent them all home. And so there you have it again. Another perfect reason for airports to take advantage of the recently passed provision that allows them to evict the TSA altogether and replace them with private screeners. You know, never mind Joe Lieberman and Sheila Lee Jackson whining about a new 9/11 if the TSA are evicted, you know, because the perverted criminals who are routinely caught stealing, abusing old women and the disabled, you know, the morons who stand next to radiation firing naked body scanners, they're really proficient in spotting the terrorists. This is the agency that trains hot dog sellers at the Super Bowl to hunt terrorists. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. And yet people like Lieberman and Jackson are saying that the TSA is so professional, we can't possibly get rid of them, otherwise terrorists are going to hit us. And then you get all these cases where they botch it every time. Knives, swords, loaded guns almost every day. There's a story about how the TSA mess it up. And so we've got them on the ropes again. And people need to lobby their local airport because this law has now been passed. The TSA are forced to consider applications from airports to have the federal agency TSA screeners themselves kicked out and replaced by private security. So the TSA doesn't even have a female screener to get this woman through security. She misses her flight, and it's another example of the TSA's inadequacy and another reason why they should be replaced. Shyness, grieving, soon to be classified as mental illness, reports Fox News. Millions of healthy people, including shy or defiant children, grieving relatives, and people with fetishes may be wrongly labeled mentally ill by a new international diagnostic manual, specialists say. In a damning analysis of an upcoming revision of the influential Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, psychologists, psychiatrists, and mental health experts say its new categories and tick box diagnosis systems were at best, quote, silly, and at worst, worrying and dangerous. Some diagnoses for conditions like, quote, oppositional defiant disorder and apathy syndrome risk devaluing the seriousness of mental illness and medicalizing behaviors most people would consider normal or just mildly eccentric, the experts said. And in addition to this, they're actually going to assign pedophiles and rapists with a mental disorder, which will give them the path to claim in court that, you know, their crimes are a result of their mental illness to get more lenient sentences, while simultaneously characterizing normal behaviors, oppositional defiant disorder, as mental illnesses. And this is out of the American Psychiatric Association, APA, which is called the Bible for mental health medicine. So this is what all the establishment psychologists and psychiatrists go off. And this is precisely what the Soviets used to send dissidents to Siberian gulags. Oppositional defiant disorder. That equates to distrusting or rebelling against authority. So, you know, if your kid doesn't bow down to the Obama worship video being played in class, as happened earlier this week in Missouri, they could be labeled mentally ill. And it's another excuse for putting millions more children on drugs like Ritalin. And as we mentioned earlier, you saw the Gary Franchi hit piece by MSNBC. You know, 9/11 truthers are crazy. They're on drugs. Basically, they're the new neo-Nazis. Questioning the official version of 9/11 is now a thought crime. You know, it's mental illness to distrust the state and the official story that they come out with. So they're trying to officially designate non-conformity and free thinking as a mental illness. We're talking total psychological warfare against any kind of cognitive ability to think for yourself. Essentially, they're trying to turn us all into the savage from Huxley's Brave New World. Despite the fact that the Independent Arab League report makes it clear that Syria is in a state of civil war and the opposition rebels, which the corporate media calls activists, are carrying out rocket-propelled grenade attacks, blowing up buildings, The Guardian has basically become a 24-hour rolling mouthpiece for Syrian. We start with the news in our top headline tonight. Leftist bath in Libya with this liberal, humanitarian, caring veneer. With terrorists, of course, now ruling that country with an iron fist. Libyans tortured, put in concentration camps. The Al-Qaeda flag flying over courthouses. The liberal media again, in particular the UK Guardian and the Independent, are up to their old tricks, selling this latest humanitarian war. Media resorts to conspiracy theories to sell Syria invasion, desperate to sell another humanitarian invasion, the leftist media in the United Kingdom has resorted to inventing conspiracy theories about events in Syria as part of a campaign to depict President Bashar Assad's government as genocidal, while completely failing to acknowledge that the country is in a state of civil war. Now, according to the attacks on Gary Franchi and others, you're a mentally ill thought criminal if you even question the official 9/11 story. But on the other hand, it's perfectly acceptable to talk about false flag terror if you're blaming it on one of the US military industrial complex's main targets for invasion, which of course we know is Syria. And just as they sold the humanitarian blood